Hi, I'm Al Blixt, and this is Board Leadership Renewal. To get the most out of this presentation, I'm going to suggest you get a pad and a pen and be ready to take some notes. You be prepared to pause the video from time to time to answer some questions for yourself. And if you like, you can take screenshots of a few key slides. Okay, with that, let's get started. Well, this is Board Leadership Renewal. How to pivot your higher ed board to be ready for the post-COVID future. Hope you've got a cup of coffee and your pad and pencil. Take some notes. Let's get started. Let's begin with the understanding that many colleges and universities in our country are going through a very difficult time. They're in crisis. And let's also recognize, as the Chronicle did in January, that most boards aren't structurally or culturally equipped to deal with the crisis. We're going to try and do something about that. So who is this for? Well, it's for you because you and I are here together. It was designed to be for those folks who are leaders in higher education, particularly those schools that are struggling with their viability, with their sustainability. It's for those schools leaders that are doing fine, but want their board to be able to step up and help them stay ahead of the curve. The goal for all of us, I think, is to have a higher education system that is robust and flourishing. For each individual school, I think the mandate is to first to survive, to do what's necessary to get through the current crisis, but then to figure out how to flourish in the post-COVID future. So here's the topics that we're going to be covering in this session. First, we're going to talk about stuff that you already know quite a bit about, the changing times that we live in. But then we're going to look at board leadership role and kind of the basics. And I do a lot of work with board development, so this is like my home ground. But in this case, we're going to look at what different would look like. What does the board leadership role need to morph to switch to in order to be prepared for the challenges that we face? We're going to take a look at how to pivot to get there, and I'm going to present to you a pathway that would allow you to help your board transition from where it is to where it needs to be. And then finally, we're going to look at next steps for you to consider if you should decide that we're the right folks to help you, but that's not necessary. This is a little bit about me. I'm Al Blixt. I'm the managing partner of New Campus Dynamics. For the last 25 years, I've been working kind of at the intersection of leadership, strategy, and system change. As you can see, I've written quite a bit on innovation and change. I've worked a lot with higher education institutions, but I've also worked in the for-profit, nonprofit, and government sectors, and you can see some of the logos of organizations that I have worked with. So let's begin with the changes that most of us are aware of. The first, of course, affecting higher education has been demographic shifts. The number of 18-year-olds is declining. We have new competitors and new options for people who want to get an education. Unfortunately, we've seen a loss of public support, both with state legislatures reducing the allocations to support public universities and colleges, but also kind of the general lack of public support for higher education, where people are asking what is the real value of a college education, especially when the cost is so high. We have social unrest on campus, as we do in all of society, and we have to be willing to account for that. We have to make sure that we are on the right track, and efforts at diversity, equity, and inclusion are built kind of cooked in now to everybody's strategy, and rightly so. We're dealing with new technologies and getting people to adopt them. We're still not quite done with the move to distance learning. And all of that has been made more difficult over the last year or so because of the pandemic. Now, those macro changes have had impacts on individual campuses, and where it's been most felt has been in enrollment declines, continuing low graduation rates. The resulting revenue declines have led to budget deficits, and unfortunately, that has led in many cases to program and staff reductions. So schools that are doing fine can pretty much keep doing what they're doing. If you've got a waiting list and a big endowment and money in the bank, you can think about improvement. You can think about doing bold and innovative things, but there's no crisis. The schools who are in peril, however, have three choices. They can change and choose to change dramatically and rapidly. They can consider a merger, and there is certainly a growing interest in mergers, and we're going to see more of that. Some of that makes sense. Unfortunately, though, for a number of schools, there is a distinct possibility, maybe not today or tomorrow, but within the next few years, that many of these schools will close their doors, and that would be a loss for all of us. So what is your case for change? You're from a college or university right now. Let's take a look. You can place yourself, your institution here, looking at the vertical axis as financial stability by whatever measures you want, money in the bank, size of endowment, cash flow, net revenue. Competitive position is on the horizontal axis, and that's measured by things like yield rate, enrollment trends, graduation rate, that sort of thing. So these four quadrants represent kind of your strategic position where you could be right now. And of course, everybody wants to be in the upper right-hand quadrant, but not everybody is. So let's take a look at what we might do to plot that situation. So here's a school that is our hypothetical school that was in the lower left-hand quadrant. That means not competitive in the race for students and not financially sustainable. The goal that they set was to do both, to improve their competitive position and to improve their financial stability. And that will require dramatic changes, really rethinking the whole business model. Another school, represented by the red triangles, is a school that was doing fine financially, but certainly not competitive. And at least you can kind of deduce from this pathway that they made a decision to make some investments to improve their competitiveness, their student services, the value that they were delivering. So I'm going to ask you to now pause. Let's go back to this. Pause this. You can take a picture of it if you like, and think about where would you place your institution today? Which of these quadrants? And think about why you would, if you were going to explain that to the rest of your colleagues, either in the administration or on the board. And where do you think you should be able to aspire to go over the next 1 to 3 years? Okay, we'll be back in just a moment. You can pause this if you like, or we can push right on. Okay, let's talk about the board's role. Boards have basically got a governance role that may not shift, but how the work gets done certainly will need to. So boards set mission and vision, monitor strategy, hire and oversee the executive, approve the budget, and manage their own internal operations. How that gets done is going to be marked by increasing flexibility, becoming more adaptive, more innovative, getting better at risk taking, and becoming more resilient. So how in the world do you get that done? Well, unfortunately, most boards have some kind of built-in barriers to change. And the first is what I would call a kind of a status quo mindset. Nothing wrong with that ordinarily, but the status quo is because the board takes its fiduciary duty seriously, and it wants to preserve what's best in the institution. It gets in the way when there is a need for change and the board is having trouble wrapping its head around what those changes might look like. Another barrier for change in some schools, not all of them, is the sheer number of members of the board. I've worked with colleges and universities where there were 25 to 35 board members. Just simply scheduling a meeting is a major task. Getting those people all on the same page is a challenge all in itself. Boards also struggle with the fact that they fundamentally have a knowledge deficit. That is to say, they are not on campus. They can read reports, but they are not fully informed either about what's going on in their own campus or what's going on in higher education as a whole. As a result of that, they do depend on the president and the cabinet, those folks, to provide them with information, but they also may come away with differing views. And unfortunately, that means that might lead to some conflict over, what are the real facts that we need to pay attention to. And finally, boards struggle with the fact that they have a process culture. There is a legislative aspect to a policy board's work, and that process is deliberate. It has step by step. We appoint committees, we have reports, we have first and second readings, we have motions, and it may go a month or 2 months or 6 months between steps in a process. So the ability to be agile is going to require some changes there. Okay, here's a second opportunity for you to pause and reflect. The shift that's going to be made is going to have to be kind of managing what we've got here are 7 kind of polarities. Now, the tension that exists between a focus on our heritage and our tradition and a focus on the future, there isn't a right answer to that. And you can imagine that we've got the little blue dot there as a slider. You can think, well, where are we today? And maybe slide that little blue dot over to the left, and then you could slide it over to the right and say we need to be more future focused. So think about your school's current state, and just off the top of your head, where do you think the board would need to go over the next few years in order to be responsive to the changing situation? So about managing risk, hope versus idealism, realism and optimism, fear and hope, problem and opportunity, being deliberate, being agile, lots of talk to action. So once again, I would say pause this tape. You can make some notes and say, where are the strengths? Where are the places, if you think that your board is doing fine, and where you've struck the right balance, that dynamic tension would be just fine. If you think there needs to be a change, this is an opportunity for you to think about that. Okay, so you can pause the tape, make some notes, come back when you're ready. Okay, we're back. This whole presentation is about the idea of a board retreat being part of the pivot, part of the shift to a new way of working. And let's look at why boards need retreats. Most boards operate with through board meetings. They're fairly frequent, they're short. Increasingly over the last year, they're virtual. But the thing about a board meeting is that it's agenda driven. It's formal. The board chair recognizes people. There are motions and seconds and votes. The chair controls everything. Robert's Rules of Order describes that. There really isn't a room for dialogue. There isn't a room for conversation. And the focus is on transactions. Nothing wrong with that, but getting through the agenda, and there may be disparate items on the agenda. The goal is to get to the end of the agenda with all those tasks completed, all the decisions made, resolutions voted on, and then the board goes home. Now, in a board retreat, if what you're looking for is something that looks like transformation, the board retreat's the ideal place to do it. You've got time, a day, maybe more if you're lucky, whether it's virtual or live and in person someday again. I hope that happens. There are going to only be 1 or 2 chances a year. And the difference is that during these retreats, there's a convening issue. They're purpose driven. And while the proceedings are structured, they're informal. There's an opportunity for dialogue, structured dialogue. They're guided by a skilled facilitator who doesn't have a stake in the outcome, who makes sure that the process is one that is moving the organization towards a solution. And the focus on solutions really is the whole idea of having a board retreat. So let's think about the board retreat as an intervention, one in which we bring people together to reboot our way of working, to refocus our intention, to reimagine our role as a board to reignite our passion, because we wouldn't be on this board if we didn't believe strongly in the school that we are serving, and to recommit to the actions that are going to be needed to make sure that our school both survives and flourishes in the years ahead. So here's a suggested pathway. We're going to go through this step by step, and you can take a look and think about how this might possibly work for your institution. The first step begins with leadership. There will be a convening leadership team, maybe not the entire leadership team, but 3 to 5 people, probably includes the board chair, maybe somebody from the executive committee, the president, maybe the provost or one of the vice presidents, but a small group that represents the top leaders who are going to be the ones who are going to convene this retreat. They're calling it. Their job is to meet and kind of set the context for this. So they need to develop the case for change. Remember, we drew the 4 quadrants there. That has something to do with the case for change. But why is it urgent that we have this meeting? What is it that we need to do differently? They have to be able to look at their board and say, you know, how ready are these folks? Maybe we've got some folks who are really anxious for change and other people who are skeptical. We've got to figure out, how do we serve the needs of everybody here? One of the big jobs will be to define the outcomes. What it will be different because we had this retreat? What is it that we want to have when we come out of it that we didn't have when we went in? And then, of course, they're going to have to figure out the logistics, the time, the date, the place, if we're going to do it virtually. And eventually, they're going to be, in the course of this step 1, the establishment of a number of different kinds of teams that are going to be needed to support the retreat planning and holding of the retreat. In step 2, the action moves to design. And for this, we will need a different kind of team, what we call an event planning team or a retreat planning team. And that will be a small group, maybe 5 to 10 people, who are a representative sample of the people who are going to be in the retreat. That planning team works together to create a design that reflects both what the convening leaders said they wanted with what they think the people on the board would want. And so their job will be to refine and expand the purpose of the meeting, to develop a set of outcomes and a high-level agenda. What are the conversations that need to take place during this retreat? When that job is done and we now have a framework, and I'm going to show you one in a minute, what one of those high-level agendas might look like, so hang on for that. Those get reviewed by the leaders. The convening leaders approve that, and some other teams, communications team, documentation team, logistics team, we think about all the tasks that have to be performed, and we figure out, you know, who's going to do that. Now, it may turn out that there's only 1 or 2 people on a particular team, but the idea is those tasks have to have people that'll carry them out. So in stage 3, step 3, this is all about staging. This is about everything that needs to happen to put the conditions in place where the board can come together with whoever else is in the meeting. And we're probably going to have the cabinet and the board, maybe possibly some other folks. Those folks are going to have to come in and experience a seamless experience during the retreat itself. So we need to make sure we have the right venue, that the logistics are set, that if we're going to have presentations, what those are going to look like. If we've mastered the technology and we're going to use some virtual sticky note programs or something like that, we've got to make sure we get that all together. We have to make sure board leaders and the president and everybody understands what their role is going to be. And that means a role as a participant, not directing, but participating, being in dialogue. And we always want leaders to feel confident. We want leaders to look good. Everybody wants to be sure that they know what's going to happen and they're ready for it. And finally, during that staging period, we have to communicate with everybody who's invited. If there's going to be pre-work or pre-reading, fine, let's get that out. We certainly want to alert people to what the purpose and agenda is going to look like. So all of that leads us up to the event itself. The retreat, as I said, is going to take place probably over the course of a day, I would think. We certainly have done some in the past when we were doing face-to-face retreats where we'd start on a Friday night and we'd go from 5 to 9 and then 9 to 6 on a Saturday, something like that. But whatever the framework is, we've got a clear agenda. We've got a detailed design. That was something I should have pointed out in step 3. We have to take that high-level design and detail it out so that whoever's facilitating this meeting will be able to know minute by minute exactly what is supposed to happen. We may not stay on that schedule completely, but it's the facilitator's job to get back on schedule if we need to. So the facilitation is going to be very important. We need to have somebody who knows what they're doing. And maybe that's somebody, that you have within your institution, or maybe it's a local consultant that you've worked with, or maybe you come to us. Whatever you do, that facilitation is going to be critical. We will be using what we call a converge diverge. That's a technical jargon. That means that there'll be some whole system, some whole retreat where everybody's together, and then that's going to alternate with breakout sessions. And most of the really good conversations going to take place during those breakout sessions. So we need to make sure that we get through the agenda, that people get what they came for, and that we've identified next steps. And that means action plans, commitments, ways of monitoring progress, whatever it is. We need to make sure that this particular retreat does not get forgotten. Unfortunately, in too many cases, retreats are in the rearview mirror 6 weeks after. Nobody can remember what happened. We can't let that happen. We've got to make sure that we actually have changed the world in this retreat. So as I promised you, this is this is a sample. Please, you can take a picture of this, but please don't just say this is the one, because it's not. It could be different. But this one reflects something that we did here a little while ago, and it reflects 3 steps, 3 phases. The first phase, session 1, the challenge, is really about setting the current state, establishing, as you can see, these are topics that would get covered. This is a 2.5-hour chunk. They're going to have to be at least 1 break in between, but then we're going to break for lunch. People have a chance. And at the end of that session, we'll stop and review and say, how are we doing? Session 2, the dream, is really about setting the vision for what we want to become as a board. What are the characteristics of a high-performing board? What do we need from each other? What is it that we want? If we're going to redesign how we're going to operate as a board, maybe we're going to change committee structures, we're going to change meeting plans, we're going to do something else. We're going to engage in some kind of education. Whatever that is, we lay that out. And you'll notice that that's a 2-hour meeting. And then we take another significant break, 20 minutes or so. So, because managing energy is so important in something like this. And then in session 3, it's the path forward. It's the next steps. And so we want to figure out what are the actions that we want to take. We're going to probably have those actions developed as plans in breakout sessions. And even if you've only got 20 board members and cabinet, you can still have 4 groups of 5 that will be able to do work. And each of those groups in this scenario would present their recommendation, and we would make decisions together and provide feedback on the day. So as I said, this is a sample. It is not the one and only, but it is a good example of what it would take to get a retreat that would actually make a difference. So what's next? I hope you found this helpful. It may very well be that you will say, well, our board's not doing so badly. I think we can handle this ourselves. Or, gee, I think this is already picking up on some things we're already doing. We don't need any help. And if that's your case, that's great. That's fine. That's wonderful. But what if you did need some help? What if you thought about, say, well, what could we do if we had some outside support? What might that look like? So you do have some options. At New Campus Dynamics, we want this to work for you. And if it doesn't work for you, then we probably shouldn't be doing it. But here are 3 levels of support. Option 1 is a course. It would probably take 4 weeks. It will take 4 weeks, each one dealing with one of the steps in the process. We will not have more than 5 to 7 institutions in the course. Each institution can send 3 people to learn together. There will be instructions and there will be work, and we have got plenty of templates and guides and checklists and samples that will be provided in the leader's guide. And then you will have an opportunity to develop your own draft, both your high-level agenda and your detailed design. We'll walk you through that step by step. So that's a kind of option 1 is we'll teach you how to do it. Option 2 is more like it's a private mentor retreat program, and it's more like we're going to coach you. We're going to provide the one-on-one support. Just it's between us and your institution. We work with that approximately 5-person convening team, work with them to supervise this whole process. But we would talk to the leadership team about how to do their work. We would provide support to whoever is facilitating. If you decide that you want to do your own facilitation for the planning team and for the event itself, we will work with that person. And at the end, you will have a design and the right preparation to hold a good retreat. This really amounts to shadow consulting. You know, we're going to be in the background, but you will have our support and our knowledge and our experience. And on top of that, after the retreat is over, you can have 30 days of unlimited coaching via email and Zoom, so that the follow-up, the critical part about making sure something happens, is there for you. So that's option 2. Option 3 is actually full consulting. That's where we work with everybody that you're dealing with. We will design and facilitate the leadership, the event planning, and the retreat. We will prepare the detailed event design. We will manage everything with preparation, working with your logistics team, your planning team, your leadership team. And you can count on us to be there, even if it's all virtual, which it probably will be. And then we will offer you 90 days of unlimited coaching via email and Zoom after the retreat. So thanks for watching. If you're planning a board retreat in 2021, we should talk. And if you don't think you need one, good for you, but I think you ought to consider it. You can schedule a no charge, absolutely free 30-minute discovery call with me. No obligation. If you're just curious, that is just fine. All of these options are priced to be very affordable. This should not be a question of cost. It should be a question of, are you willing to make the commitment and invest the time that's needed? There's a couple of ways to get in touch with me. You can send an email to my email address, alblixt@newcampusdynamics.com. Let me know when you'd like to talk. If you would be kind enough to give me your name, your institution, and a phone number where you can be reached, that would be great. Or in the alternative, we have a scheduling service, and you can go to the link that's shown here, calendly.com, alblixt free discovery call. And you can choose a time, and it will pop up on my schedule, and we will have a conversation. So thanks so very much. I'm looking forward to talking to you. Contact information should also be somewhere on the page where this video is shown. And I hope that you do nothing but great stuff, you and your board, and wish you the absolute best. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.